Welcome back to the Geometric View, Season 8, Episode 88. Today we get into a deep conversation with Robert. We go deeper and deeper into electricity, plasma electromagnetic dynamics, and how everything is interconnected. Please stay tuned and check it out. So the 2022 Electromagnetic Universe World Expo was amazing. We'll be releasing the
link is in the show notes below
on this channel.
Let's get into the circuit.
The Geometric
We
View.
appreciate your support. The best way to donate to us is on PayPal. Just send money directly to goldenscaling@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
So the new Electric Universe memo, which is not called EU memo, obviously, which means the old EU memo won't receive any more updates. Of course, neither will the EU primer. But the new one is called EPEMC. It's like correcting the eyes, what's real and not, something like that. And its short icon is called real or not real. And it's got a lot of links in it to help people. It's got a section for, people who are already into it. Then there's newcomers, and then critics and skeptics. And it's got various appendices. I've got some history about electric cosmology that the ChatGPT wrote up. So extending us back from 1752 to 1654. So we're already back there with Sir Isaac Newton. So that is hidden history. In fact, when you read the appendix, you'll see that it didn't want to talk about that history, basically pretending between the philosopher Thales, 600 BC, and Benjamin Franklin, nothing was going on. And I said, because it said there's nobody in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, or the Enlightenment talking about the electricity. I said, so there's no one that mentioned the word electricity between Gilbert. Well, between Thales and then it said Gilbert, magnetism. I said nobody between Gilbert and Franklin, and then he came up with two more names. I was like, So I pushed the date back. It's a very good paper. That'll be coming out, well, as soon as Macon finishes all the references. The trip reports one went out yesterday, and there will be another one on Graffiti Rock. You guys are going to be delighted to see all of the Saturnian and all the Electric Universe motifs that are in modern graffiti at Graffiti Rock, and it's also very colorful pictures. As soon as I could find them, I had to find the portable drive because the actual folder on Google Drive was missing the stuff. And then I put out a mess report, and I'll be putting out a Jerry and Me 13. So there actually will be, I guess, 5 papers this week. So a lot happening. Glad to see everybody here this morning. Hope you have a really good talk. My proposal would be, to talk about some of the new things that are happening in physics, but I haven't been keeping up very heated. So I'll just let Robert take it away.
Well, I put a number of comments in the chat group earlier on. I did find the program about the three bodies, the Chinese TV program, but I haven't watched it, and I'm a bit dubious about doing so for a variety of reasons. But this weekend I had with the ongoing description of what sort of mathematics is required to describe the processes we think are going on. I've had that discussion with Roy, and we were reviewing one of Decenti's videos in Vortex Algebra, where he had an epiphany. I think it's called Epiphany 4 or something like that. But anyway, he realized a problem he had with Fortress matrices, and in reviewing that video, Weber's equation for electrical interaction, which you will see in his work that Andrea Sis has kindly translated for us, that that equation has actually been turned into matrix operators or matrices in the actual equation. And the issue I've been talking with Roy about is that all the mathematics we see is the two-dimensional plane between two given objects. And in my discussions with Andre, I said we need to be very clean about the dimensional analysis that I think is incorrect in the mathematical realm, the mathematician realm. So I've gone back to Euclid's description of a few things. And what we will find if we look at the analysis of dimensional space and the objects that occur therein, we need to understand, in order to be able to see some features in, say, space dimensions 0, 1, 2, 3, the only way you can have the definitions that appear in modern maths is if you're looking at that space from a higher dimension. So what do I mean by that? If we look at 0 dimension space, it's just supposed to be a location, a point somewhere. Well, a point can't exist without it being in a space. Euclid's definition of a line was a path between two locations or 2 points. So you need one-dimensional space to say where the points are in that space. But the line itself is not actually made up of adjacent points, which is what our modern definition of a line is. And further, it says it's straight. Well, what they really should be saying, it's the shortest dimension, the shortest distance in a given space. So if we look at it on a plane, there will be a line that connects two locations, but we have no idea of any shape that line may have, because that line in one-dimensional space could be a shadow, and certainly could be that could be the case in all dimensional spaces above it. So we'd only know it's the shortest line if we look at that line from a higher dimension. So that, for example, let's say we've got a line that's been mapped because it's a helix in three-dimensional space. Well, we wouldn't know that the line is curved unless we're in three-dimensional space. And further, we wouldn't know it's the shortest distance that's possible for that line. So the shape and those things come from a higher dimension. They're not something that you can know in dimension one space, for example. And if we say, and the best example of this is if we take the definition of a parallel line. And I need to be careful here to make sure you guys understand what I'm really saying. A line can be said to be parallel to another line if the distance between those two lines never varies, which is fine for straight parallel lines. However, a helix path can be parallel to another helix path, but the distance between those lines, if the helix is converging or expanding, will change. The lines will remain parallel, they'll never cross. But the definition I used, if we're going to keep this distance invariant, won't work if it's a helix. So there are real issues in terms of the modern definitions of geometry in shapes and what makes them real. And I think there's been some serious mistakes in understanding in the mathematics. Now, whether that's deliberate because we want to hide some piece of technology that gives us advantage or not, I'm not so sure. It's either they think they know more than they do, or they don't realise the mistake that's being made. So when I say a matter structure exists in a nested dimensional, a set of nested dimensional spaces, and I think it's the first 13, but it could be more, it would give us, that model would give us both a space that's quite complex, giving us many dimensions between the 0 dimension and number 37, which happens to be in my definition of numbers, the final definition, the space nest we need. There's a lot of non-prime dimensional spaces in there where you get a lot of benefit from the fact that it's non-prime, because it'll give you the ability to move and things like that. So so my definitions of the prime number in terms of integers goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, 29, I think it's 31 and then 37. And if you look at the distance between those numbers, you only get motion when the step is more than one. So step between dimensions 3 and 5 starts to give you motion, and 5 and 7 gives you another 2 degrees of freedom. And orthogonality, I'm not so sure whether, I think that's a real thing, but it's a bit hard to explain when we get above dimension 3 what orthogonality actually means. And I think the orthogonality we assume for three-dimensional space is in fact not the 90 degrees, but the phi angle, the 1 radian angle that we would get, which is about 91 point something degrees. But anyway, so there's some misunderstandings in dimensional analysis. But if we take my model, you can't have time as a dimension in the universe in the sense of Einsteinian and that models that come from it. It's just, it can't be a dimension in space because the objects are unique, separate, and able to move in the entire nested space. But when we get to the next dimension up in prime numbers, what we get is a whole bunch of physical universes that can exist in a constructional sense, which gives us the infinite parallel universe type model that quantum goes on about. So that was one of the reasons why I said, while I don't have much faith in the quantum model in terms of speculation, there are observations in there that could well be real, and we can't just, say, oh, we'll just chuck the model and all its data away. We've got to be very careful about making sure we sift through the data and the thinking to see whether there's something that actually works if we have a different perspective. So that was one of the reasons why I was pointing to some weird things, but I also wanted it to be clear to the group that I'm still having quite serious arguments about electrogeology and how minerals form and what gravity really is with my colleague, and I'll be very clear about this. Roy is making a serious claim to me that gravity is in of itself something like electricity. It's a real thing. And I'm still debating about whether it's the combination of all the effects of the sort of charges that I think may exist. In other words, I think it's a gross effect, whereas Roy thinks it's a contributing characteristic of the structure of the universe. And I'm not adverse to his idea at all. I just can't prove it one way or the other. Which just
Why don't you just show him? Why don't you just show him the 3 papers that K. Curvature, and he can chew on the idea of making gravity electrodynamical.
Well, that same approach was taken by the Common Sense Science guys, the papers that I'd sent you originally. And Roy has copies of them, but I don't think he's read them. And I can understand why, because he's come out of the quantum thinking, but I'm talking to him about stuff that I really don't want to go into because of what he actually did when he discovered things. And there's a feature to do with gravity that he's come across, and he's given a quantum model explanation. And I spent an hour and a half. I said, look, I don't want you to be telling stuff to me that you're not allowed to, but I will describe the features that I think you've observed from our model that we've been working on. And initially it's very hostile to me because he thinks I'm just dissing anything he has to say. But when I walked him through what was going on, he did actually soften up to looking at what he has experienced from a different point of view. So it's a slow process. Another example was Cherenkov radiation. What is it really? And if we have
worry about his opinion so much, so Robert, that's what I want to know. I mean,
sorry,
why you're interested so much in this guy's opinions? If if you're not thinking along the same lines, why is it so important that you convince this guy one way or another?
The reason why it's important is we've both developed our model. The model I talk about is a collaboration between us, and there are things that I'm aware of that I know are real, but he's not allowed to talk about it because a lot of it is still, I signed a secrets oath sort of thing, and I really can't talk about it. So I can only talk about the things he would have experienced when I've figured them out from a model point of view. And under his disclosure rules that he's allowed to operate on, it's only under those conditions when I figure something out that he's actually allowed to talk about it a little bit more freely. So I'm not trying to...
I think you're going to struggle if you're arguing against a lot of mathematical fundamentals. So
no. He's well and truly on board with De Cinti's square root of -1, because he's actually going to go away and apply his mathematical model to see if there's a mistake in De Cinti's work.
I'm sure there isn't. It's quite logical as far as I can see it.
But one of the questions,
and as far as this dimensionality thing, of course, I think you've got to. I mean, to be able to identify any point in one-dimensional point in space, you need two of them, don't you? And then at least you've got a measure of something. Without 2 points, you haven't got a measure of anything really.
Well, a one-dimensional space could be. The trouble here is to have a location in a space, you need to have a spatial definition. So a point makes no sense unless it exists in a higher dimensional space, because that then gives...
I see what you're saying, and exactly what exists in. I mean, we work in a 3D mechanical sort of let's say paradigm, but then they add the time on, which produces that fourth dimension apparently, and it seems to mess up fundamentals that happen in 3 dimensions don't necessarily happen that way in 4. But you cannot observe that from the 4th dimension, which is where we live generally. You have to go into the 5th dimension to be able to observe the time sequences correctly, which is what a lot of people are attempting to do, where time no longer becomes a factor in what is there. You're on the dimension above time, and so I think what you're saying to that extent is quite true. But I think we've got to find ways of getting to that 5th dimensional place where we can look down again. That's how I see it a little bit.
I agree with that in some respects, but the reason why I'm going to chuck away time as a dimension is that if we look at dimension 3 to 5, there's one in there that allows us the freedom of movement, provided the object is actually existing uniquely in both dimensional space structures, and they're nested. But what happened to me very early on, I'm going right back to 2000, I met Roy in 2014 and we had quite a good at Christmas time, and then we got stuck into he had a Prionic model that he was trying to describe, and I went through his papers and I said I had real problems with that. I just read all the common sense science mathematical papers that showed that gravity and mass behavior could be explained directly from electromagnetics, and at the time I was as ignorant of Weber as most of the electrical engineers in the world are, because it's not a subject that's covered. And then I ran into a book that described starting from matter and gravity produced electrodynamics, and in my career of doing business systems analysis and descriptions of systems, I realized straight away that for you to have a gravity description that comes out of using electromagnetics, or an electromagnetics description that comes out of using mass and gravity, there has to be a common underlying structure that allows both views to exist quite validly, which is what we see when we look at Weber's electrical interaction stuff, because his approach is a Newtonian approach where time is irrelevant really in the structure, and it's of the same nature as Newton. And then when we take the fact that all the matter we know about carries electric and magnetic and temperature characteristics and is in motion, we're going to say that there is a unifying underlying construct that allows us to go from the absolutely tiny to the absolutely huge. And it's this electromagnetic charge interaction stuff that's going on. That is the unifying thing. And if we understand that correctly, we'll get rid of a lot of the misconceptions in the quantum model. They'll just vanish. We don't need dark matter, don't need dark energy, don't need dark whatever. We don't need strong and weak nuclear forces because electromagnetics will take care of it, and so on. So there's a whole lot of stuff that we can...
I have a serious question for you then. Why don't you just throw all your weight behind plasma electromagnetic dynamics? Now that we have a good, solid start, you can see the AI confirmed that everything I did was logical. It just threw up, we got to prove it all. And I'm going, well, it's already
no.
the whole point of quantum mechanics.
I'm not saying that those papers were irrelevant and not useful, because I think they are. I think they're very important. But what I'm trying to do is to come up with a description of behavior that then can have a mathematics that expresses it correctly or more correctly than we have at the moment. So, which means that, we went and got Newton's Principia paper, we got Gilbert's paper, we got Faraday's 2-volume text, we've got Whittaker's History of Electricity and Magnetism, the one that was written, 100 odd years ago. I've got Weber, Ampere's and Coulomb's stuff from Andrea's We've just got to comb through it very carefully to see, is there a different sort of mathematics model that we can help describe what we're talking, that accounts for correctly the fractal nature of construction of matter, the motion that must occur, and then all the correct interactions that don't rely on cross and vector product stuff that may not be right, which is what
I think can we rely on Don Scott's view of the electromagnetic interaction and plasma and all the rest of it? That's
what I'm saying. They're part of the puzzle. So the thing that Don Scott has brought to my mind, which I'm not sure too many people who deal with electricity understand, is this idea of a force-free current. In other words, the direction of the magnetic and electric fields are aligned, then rotate to a 90-degree separation, and then reverse pointing in the opposite direction aligned, and then continue through a 270-degree orthogonally.
Right.
And this behavior, I know for a fact, is not expressed entirely in a manner that's obvious to the people who study it. And I doubt whether we pick up on what's really going on, because that's fundamental to how a photon works and the reason why it has to be a construct rather than a wave.
Correct.
Which brings me to the other issue that I have.
Construct. Well, there's another C word that seems a little bit more apropos. Oh yeah, it's circuit. It's a circuit.
Yeah. Well, the circuit can be is a construct. So, but anyway, what I was going to say is that if we look at the idea of waves and ocean and all the rest of it, what we tend to forget in this fluid model that we have is that there is a behavior of fluid that produces what we would call an ocean current, which is where the molecule, instead of just oscillating around some point, actually goes into a helical conjugate path and travels longitudinally from one location to another. And what we have in the wave model is transverse, which is an oscillatory side-to-side motion, as well as a longitudinal direction displacement. And these two things occur simultaneously in every wave and current stream. And I've been saying to anybody that'll listen, that if the idea that light is a wave is actually the correct view, where is the mathematical model that translates a wave into a conjugate behavior? In other words, a spurt of material traveling. And I can't find it. So I think we're missing some critical points. But the thing is, until we understand what sort of behavior has to be there to explain what we're observing, we're going to struggle with the maths and the model and all the rest of it. And there's important contributions coming from everywhere. We've just got to look at it all and just think, okay, why is this the behavior that we observe? Why should it be this behavior? Why isn't it some other sort of behavior? The sort of fundamental questions. You know, we've got observations, we've got ideas, but we haven't, you know, knuckled under to this occurs because it has to for these reasons, whatever those are. And when we look at cosmology and quantum physics and a whole set of sciences, including archaeology and geology as it happens, is that when we see how they describe what goes on, nowhere in those descriptions is there a clean description of why that behavior has to be the behavior that we do observe. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a, you know, why should this be the case? Why is it that way? And the other thing is that we've also got
where I'm coming from. Hold on. Where I'm coming from is if you just flow with it, you're going to. There's more power in the collaboration. Since I've laid that very good foundation, and then you have the MIMS philosophy, you could just roll with those, and you're going to start to get traction. That would be my point. That does not require you to not work with this other guy. The whole idea is it should be extremely whimsical for you to work with this other guy, or with Buddy, or with anybody else. If you use similar methods and similar, that would be my main. It's not really a criticism; it's a suggestion that I'm making.
But we've got to remember that Roy has suffering quite serious medical issues.
Well, I'm sorry. I am sorry to hear that, but I'm not going to. When it comes,
yeah. But the other thing I'm going to get him to do, I haven't actually.
Hold on a second. When I finish the abandoned stellar fusion, and I finally get the threefold sciences paper done, and the MIMS book is out, and maybe the MES book, I don't know if that'll come after. At some point, it's going to happen in the EPEMC that we tackle general relativity. I'd like you to be a part of that. I really would. I would love it if Stephen Crothers would be, but you know he's pretty cagey kind of person. But absolutely, Don Scott's stuff is going to be in there. Yeah. And I would like you to be a part of it. I can't speak for. I'm sorry. Did you say Roy? I can't speak for Roy.
Well, Roy is suffering memory lapses and heart issues and liver and diabetes and all sorts of stuff. So getting him to be well enough to actually go through this material is quite difficult. But he has an account with academia, so I'm going to say, these are the papers I want you to collect for you, because I don't want to actually set up an academia account for a variety of reasons. But he will drag those papers down, and I'm going to refer to them. But when we talk about relativity and all the rest of it, I don't think we even need to go there. If we can use, well, Stephen and others have shown that relativity just fails on so many levels that I don't think we need to have that argument at all. What we really need to do is come up in much the same way that Eric Lerner and Don Talbot and others have done, is to produce, and I'd love to have Wal Thornhill's book. I just don't know. I'm going to have to chase that down and find out what the state of play is on it, because I know it was almost ready for publishing. And what we do is we produce a model that uses all the evidence we can put our hands on to and publish that model with the variety of things in it, and come back and have. I know I need to rewrite a lot of the stuff I've written, because it's just in so many ways not where it needs to be. Even my paper on stellar fusion, this fusion star that I wrote, I admit very early on that it's what my ideas, the development of the ideas. And I know that paper had done the rounds of NASA, and there was another guy in NASA who thought, now I can call myself a stellar engineer, make models of the solar system that actually relate to what we observe. So, but that was to, introduce the idea of electromagnetics correctly into into a system that allowed you to express gravitational behavior as well as electrical charge interaction mechanisms and, you know, repulsion and attraction ideas that go on. So we need to provide stepping stones for the guys who are real, you know, so embedded in the mainstream understanding. They need a pathway to get to where they need to, and telling them that they're all idiots all the time isn't helping them to at least look at the steps that might get them.
Did you look at the new real and not real, the changing the eyes paper? Did you look through that yet?
Not completely, because
okay. That's the goal.
Yeah,
what you just described is already in motion.
Yeah, I know. We've been talking about this ever since we met. So
I just wasn't sure if you were up on what's currently happening with it.
Yeah, no, I'm just, you know, it's a work in progress. I mean, I've been doing this since 2015, the beginning of 2015. You've been doing it since, you know, whenever, 2013 or 12 or whenever. And the really weird thing is I was writing a novel back in 2008, 9, 10, and I go back and read it and I'm seeing all these universal ideas, and it was like a story sort of thing where I described how you could create molecular memory, how you could create an encryption system that would be difficult to break, and a whole bunch of other stuff. It was just, you know, chuck my imagine out there and just get it down on paper. And the view I took was, you know, I don't know whether you guys have ever read or watched the film that H.G. Wells wrote the script for, called The Man Who Could Work Miracles. It's a 1936 film done in Britain, black and white. But that film is where this, you know, it starts off at the beginning where you got the gods touching some poor schmuck in the middle of nowhere in Britain and giving him the power to cause whatever he wanted to happen just to happen. So that was the idea. I just took it a bit further than what H.G. Wells did and said, you know, if you could really do these sorts of things, what are the sort of things? And I just let my mind run riot. And now I come back and have reread what I wrote 10, 12 years ago, and I think, how did I get so close to the thinking that more than just me has had? And when I go back and review some of the stuff I've written in the papers, I see the same thing. You see it everywhere. Let Nick and Buddy and even Andy jump in, and you know, let them play with you and interact. And you know, this is a think tank, so parallel process. I'm just going to step back with the comment that this is a joint project that I expect everybody to have some say in.
Okay.
I got a question right off the bat here, Robert. Well, you mentioned something about Prionic research. When I was in the beginning stages of the Doughertyset, that was one of the only things that I could actually found that related to what I was researching, prions. So I'd love to see some of that research, or if you had some of that, I'd love for you to share it or expound on that a little bit.
Well, there's Roy's description of Prionic model was a bit. There's binging. Somebody's making a bunch of noises. I keep getting the noise. I don't know why though.
Yeah, I'm hearing it too.
Anyway, with Roy's discussion about his Prionic model, his paper, I mean, he suffers dyslexia and a few other issues as well. So you know, when he starts writing stuff, you got to really talk to him to re-edit the document so it walks in sense. But he's running with a quantum Prionic model, and there are a variety of models out there. And his take to what was going on is a little bit different. You know, if you look at what Wal Thornhill was talking about in terms of the neutrino being the aether particle, and then you've got other people saying the aether particles have to look and behave in a manner similar to electrons and protons and photons, and which is, you know, if we're talking about a fractal construction, whatever we can see at this level in terms of the constituents that make up atoms, for example, that sort of behavior has to occur at the foundational level, at the base. And early in my struggles to try and come up with a model, one of the things is that if we look at the way matter's construction, what was the flaw? Where did you actually hit the ground? And there was no subcomponentry. And it was only in the last 8 weeks or so that I finally figured out what the flaw was, and it's a geometrical flaw. In the sense that if we come up with Euclid's definition in geometry in terms of what makes a line, the line under Euclid's definition has you can't cut it up. It's a continuous path. It has no subcomponentry, which means you can't divide any more than that line. You know, you're stuck there. You can't. And when we look at the Doughertyset, the stuff you're looking at, it's the same thing. You get nested toroids within toroids within toroids within toroids. At some point, if we've got a fractal model, there has to be a flaw where you can't have, for a given toroidal structure, anything underneath it. It is of itself complete, and from which you build everything else that ever exists. For the fractal model to work, that has to be the case, because if we look at the basic definition, you have a generator, which is this thing that carries all the characteristics we'll see at higher scale, the generator has no subcomponentry. It has all the characteristics that are going to be expressed in construction. That's our base particle structure or generating structure. And then we have a set of rules for construction. And that construction then determines what sort of things you can create out of the generator by, whatever it does. So it's a binary interaction mechanism. And I think that what we see is was it Robert, I'm just trying to remember the guy who's doing the prime number investigation, Robert, can't remember his name. Anyways, here's the one that came up with a 24-hour clock number with prime numbers lined out around it.
Robert Grant.
Yeah, Robert Grant. So, we're seeing different people focus on different parts of this structure, and they're very, very important. I think prime numbers, geometry, and resonance are fundamental to any model that we're going to develop that explains the structures we see at the scale we are. But with electrodynamics or this charge interaction mechanisms that are going on, we can go from the floor to the biggest structure that's possible, however infinitely large that thing is. And it's all united because the structure is fractally generated from a lower level. So, we hear this phrase, as above, so below. Well, what I'm going to say is, as above, so on the floor. Whatever the base constructional environment is, that's what occurs. That's what replicates up through the structure. So if I look at an atom and we say, okay, we have a particle being expressed from a radioactive material we're going to call a neutron. It contains a positive particle, which is about 1836 units of mass. We have an electron, which is 1 unit of mass. And we have an electron's mass worth of neutrino or photon structure that enables that structure to be temporarily persistent. And I think that behavior occurs all the way down to the bottom. So if we were at the prion at the base level, we would see a positive structure that is light in terms of what its mass quantity or its energy quantity is. And then you would see a positive particle that's way bigger in terms of energy. And then you've got a combinational construction that equates to the photon, which will be tiny in comparison to the two structures that I've already described. So, the work that Ramon did in turning it all into electron volts drives home the message that the structure is effectively electromagnetic because we can measure volts and amps and resistance in this process. And it's a bit hard to do that sort of discrimination in a gravity-driven model because we don't have this, repulsion and attraction mechanism kicking off. Yeah. I hope that helps you, buddy, in the way I think it works. Well, but we need to understand our geometry. We need people who can understand the geometry. We need people who can understand the interactions, the motional behavior, and then there's this the mathematics that's there. How do we use flawed mathematics to show that this is the behavior that exists? Because that flawed mathematics is actually based on gross interaction mechanisms that we have observed. So there's got to be some truth in it. It might not be accurate, but it is a pointer that we're on the right track if we can get this behavior that Ramon exposed with the electron volt papers that he's done.
I'm not going to interject much because I'm just walking through a bit of a woody place. But yeah, I think it's interesting that if we were to actually analyse things from a 3D perspective, we'll get significantly different results. I think again, Robert E. Grant illustrated this when he came out with his precise musical precise intonation, which separated the octaves volumetrically rather than 2D linear, and got absolutely bang on results with it. So, like I say, we need to like you say, we need to slightly look at what the maths is doing. Oh, fuckers cut that tree down, bastard. We need to look at it from a 3D perspective. But now we have, the technology with the computers to do fantastic volumetric analysis. I think I could put together a fluid dynamics model with about 2 million interacting entities. So I'm sure we could model a little bit maybe of the solar system, maybe hopefully, pretty well. But, so anyway, that's my view on it. If I don't come back in, I'm just getting picked up in a minute, so I'll see you guys in a bit. If I don't see you in a bit, bye bye.
Okay. That brings me to the issues of the ancient Greeks' analysis of this stuff back then. When we look at the examination of musical scales, it was all harmonics, and based upon mathematical relationships that had been observed. But during the early 20th century, there was a push to shift away from 432 base to 440.
Absolutely.
And I
now
think
this is worth looking at, because this herein lies at root of many of the problems in physics. That the real patterns have been ignored, and we've got to make people aware of the actual patterns using their own data. That's what we've got to do. So,
but I think that transform to go from 432 to 440 hertz base tuning was done to hide technological tools that gave real advantage to the people who knew the real story, and with the 440 was a distraction to make everybody look in the wrong direction, while the guys that stayed with 432 had their eye on the prize. I think
exactly. But if we look at the state of music, looking at it from a music line perspective, and you'll see that even all world's orchestras are playing the wrong fucking tune. You know what I mean? When you hear it played right, there's a big difference. Anyway, guys, that's me now. See you in a bit.
So, it's like the efforts that Buddy's been doing with the geometry. People don't think geometry is important into the matter structure, and it's critical. You don't get matter without a geometry, and the structured atom model and wave behavior and all the rest of that sort of stuff that they're trying to push requires a correct geometry and a correct description of motion. But what we've been seeing for at least the last probably 170 years, or at least since about the middle of the 1800s, is a direct drive to obfuscate and basically hide things. You've got to ask yourself the question: if Weber in 1846 was able to come up with a model for the atom that literally works, why was it suppressed for as long as it has been? Let's face it, the plum pudding model that was originally thought of is not an adequate solution to the problem, whereas something that was definitely in the right track was ignored. And when we look at the history between Gilbert's time and Benjamin Franklin, what's being ignored by the physical history and science is the actual history of what was going on. Benjamin Franklin got interested in lightning and all the rest of the stuff because in France at the time you had these guys, the electrics wizards, running around France, hooking women up onto things and zapping the hell out of everybody and giving them a shock, like some sort of thrill, as it were, which was going around the courts of Europe in it was like a fad, and that prehistory to the likes of the understanding and analysis into electricity itself was not so much the magnetics of it, because that was basically ignored, is a very important factor in keeping people in the dark, as it were. There's a lady called Kate, I can't remember her name. She's got a YouTube channel and she does science history, and some of her videos are well worth the time to watch, because you start to see a history, because she likes the history.
Catherine loves physics. It's a great channel.
Yeah, and she's so bringing to the front stuff that has been hidden away or ignored. And to discover what she's actually said is so valuable to us, because let's face it, we don't have a study in physics that shows the history of development in anywhere near the level of detail that's required. If Ramon and I and others had done Weber.
There's a chapter 1 for free from Electric Currents in Geospace and Beyond. It comes the closest other than my work. And that's for free. You can access it from the gateway.
Yeah. But what I was saying is that if we had been exposed to the way Weber thought in electrodynamics, which Faraday developed Maxwell had in his treatise a whole chapter devoted to, and Maxwell used some of Weber's observation, for example, the value of C and so on. Where would we be today with that more understanding of electrodynamics that gives us the Newtonian laws of motion from an electromagnetic interaction mechanism point of view, rather than a mass point of view? So it's a shame in some respects that Newton himself got called away to have dinner with the wife when he was doing his optics, because he would have discovered infrared and thus, he's not a dummy. He would have just deduced the existence of UV just from his prism experiments, and that would have put the cat amongst the pigeons, 50 to 60 years before the turn of the 1800s. It would have been quite interesting to see what the results are. So what we've got is a series of missed opportunities, but the history of development is not covered in university level coursework ever.
No, my papers are the best stuff for all that, because of the chronologies, and now with the new stuff, that the clear history of the electric aspect, written out. It's not covered anywhere to that degree. Most people know about the Ben Franklin kite experiment, but they don't really know that he was only one of many who were in hot pursuit of the knowledge.
Yeah. So, at the time that Ben Franklin was doing his experiments, there was this huge argument about the fluid nature of the electricity, and they certainly, by the time of Ben had worked out that there was a negative and a positive flow to the electrical behavior. And when we look at plasma, that's what actually happens. But, when it came to a solid like a copper wire, I still think the electrons form a plasma behavior about the wire. It's just the positive part of the structure isn't able to flow as freely as the electric. And I think that in itself was part of the misunderstanding that occurred. Let's face it, Ampere and his peers, and Weber and his peers, and everybody else during the 1800s did not know that the wire had substructure to it. The idea that the wire had atoms in it was only being dimly understood due to Mendeleev and chemistry. That the idea that there was structure in the atom itself wasn't something that occurred until very late in the 1800s, and it took them another 40 years to figure out the sort of structure that was actually present in the atom, and we're still doing it. The SAM model is like in the last 20 years or so in terms of explaining what the atomic structure has to be, and that gets rid of the neutron. Now, getting rid of the neutron in quantum and classic physics textbooks is going to cause some real issues, I think, for physics, especially for the people who think they know they have, they got a good beat on it. They just know it's right. A bit like the Men in Black, where Will Smith's having his chat with the mentor. He says, look what you've learned in the last, little while. Imagine what you're going to know in the future. And everybody else out there is totally ignorant of the truth. But anyway, and that's what I think. That's where we are. We're trying to convince people who don't want to be convinced because they're so sure that they're right. So the only real hope we can do is come up with a model that everybody in grade 6 can get their head around, and that's our job. I don't think we should waste time trying to convince the club who got all their Nobel prizes and status due to I've got a doctorate or I'm a professor, that sort of status stuff. I don't think we should waste our time on them at all. Let's go to the kids, and if we can help the kids to understand what's really going on, then the progress of science by everybody dying off will happen.
Well, I mean, maybe they don't know what to say. I don't know.
Buddy's
working right now.
Let's see what Buddy's got to say.
Yeah. I'm working right now. Otherwise, I'd chime in a bit more, I guess. Yeah, I'm in the middle of something.
Oh, well, how about you, Andy? You're sitting there quiet and all the way listening to interesting stuff, I hope.
You might be asleep.
Yeah. No, I'm not asleep. Come on, not yet. Not quite. Yeah, look, a lot of this is just, you got to see where it all, I don't know, just as it continues on, where exactly does it, head, what's it lead to? That's really what it is. What's it at the end of it? What's it going to actually do? That's what I see a lot of it. Yep.
Well, I think it gets past the hopelessness model of quantum. Everything's by happenstance. It shows how everything's interconnected. Gives meaning to what we hear.
Yep, I agree. Yep. But then you see, the more you get interconnected too. Then you come down to the other. As we do that, then you come down to what we're hearing now, within our societies, the fear and all that. And like when I put that video there yesterday of that, what's the name, woman doing that on,
Oh yeah.
well, right now, basically that was to me, and I listened to a couple of other bits on it, and it comes down to there's a big thing at the moment, and it goes back before World War One, and that all fits in with what you're talking about with physics and that, because you had the German, Austrian, Hungarian group that were coming up with a lot of different theories and hypotheses, which then years later turned out to have relevance, right? And now you've got it on again, like you go and have a look at the so-called New Davis, the New World Order. Would I be wrong in saying Davos and the New World Order type thing is a combination of the majority of it would be a German American type think tank? The majority of it. Would I be wrong in saying that?
Well, what I think is going on there is that in watching her video, she's talking about the baronet, who is, the front face of these organisations, and you look at her connections and who she's connected with, and I reckon, yeah, you used to work, baronet, whoever you are, you used to work for the British MI6, Secret Service of Britain. You're there to be the front person, a bit like which is a bit like what is claimed of Elon Musk and others. They're the front face of the CIA, and if you look at who was participating in that group from Australia, you got the who's who of right-wing authoritarianism in this country.
Yes.
You've got Abbott and Howard, and I'm surprised Dutton isn't there. I'm surprised Morrison isn't there. But anyway, you've got that group.
Morrison's not there because he was never really part of that group, right?
Yeah,
but what's his name? Hang on, I'll tell you in a sec.
Anyway, what I was going to say is that in terms of the idea of the Germans and the Americans having got together, well, there's clear evidence that some Americans wanted the Prussian education system established in America, and they've succeeded. But what I think it really is that it's the secret service, the secret police of the aristocracy of Britain and other countries in Europe and the Middle East and elsewhere that were all about keeping their monarch in charge. But the problem is that stuff that was supposed to protect them, in the case of Russia, totally failed. And what happened in France, God knows. They just went after everybody who was rich and chopped their heads off. So the rest of the world weren't keen on that happening to them.
Brendan O'Connell did a further analysis of a lot of this, and what I come up with, listening to it all, you've got this struggle developing, which is the old Commonwealth British Empire. And as Churchill said during World War II, give the Americans time, they'll always come on the right side. And I think geopolitically, a lot of what we're watching at the moment is that being put in place to do their damnness to ensure that the British Commonwealth system becomes the big player again, somehow or other. So when they're talking all this stuff with your sustainable cities and using less energy and all those things that Klaus Schwab and that talk about, right? And it comes down to, Jordan Peterson and all that. When you listen to them all, they're all monarchists,
Oh, that's why I put the comment in the chat group, you know, what we're talking about is industry or business plus government, which is.
And then during the day, I listened to Peterson talking to RFK, and he kept banging on about this left and this left and this left stuff, you know, and the wokeism and all that. And yeah, we all know there's certain things going on with operations to change people, supposedly sexuality, and often being done on very young people. And we all know most people have issues with that, right? But they're about the only couple of items. And then the other one they go on about is equity. And the way I hear it is this: they're saying the same as Klaus Schwab and that. You'll own nothing. It's who's going to own it. Yeah. So they say, you know, the left's too busy worrying about equity. Well, no, the left just points out that everybody should be able to have a relatively. We have enough resources that everyone should be able to have a relatively comfortable roof over their head.
But you need to have.
What's a responsible citizen? It's responsible. John Howard's view. Well, we know what a little liar he is. And Abbott.
I think democracy in Australia died when Gough Whitlam got turfed, courtesy of the Liberals and the CIA. I think democracy in America got turfed when John F. Kennedy got shot. And democracy in other countries has, you know, fallen away to the wayside by a variety of things. But I think what we're really seeing in the world and failing to understand is we've had a huge trauma in the past. If we go back to, you know, what the legends tell us, you know, people are in absolute fear that tomorrow a big rock would fall on their head and kill them. And they'd experienced and watched it actually happen to others. So there's a huge amount of trauma in those that lived in that time. And that memory is definitely part of our history. It's remembered in a way that we don't actually pay attention to. So, you know, claims by particularly Velikovsky and other psychologists of his time, the idea of, you know, trauma that's inducing amnesia, which then Graham Hancock is going on about, but I think in some respects he should acknowledge Velikovsky's claims, because I don't think Hancock came up with that idea on its own. But regardless, so you've got a group of people that are so traumatized by their experience, they know it really happened, and now they think they've got the technology to stop it from ever happening again. But for them to be able to exercise it, they think they need to have total control over the planet, because they don't trust the people who don't know to see it their way to protect themselves type thing. So that you get this desire that business plus government, which is effectively dictatorship in the sense of Mussolini and Hitler and the other empires that have run down that, you know, it's a fascism basically is what it is. So we have to access total control over people. We've got to make them think the way that they need to think in order to be able to protect them. Yeah. But that's one group. The other group that have actually healed and moved past this trauma are saying, no, we just need to acknowledge we've got to be respectful to the universe, understand that these events occur, prepare for them so that they don't crush us. Well, they're the two options, and they're in direct conflict with each other, really, which is why we see this.
Mud Fossil Roger, what's his name's doing a series at the moment.
Mungo.
And a lot. I know. Mud Fossil, what's his name? Roger. Can't think of his surname at the moment. But he's doing a series on a moment, and it's with Velikovsky's writings, and again going back to our biology is representative of the universe, right? So, you know, and he's saying, look, here's where Venus came from, the red dot, right? So we may be calling that a catastrophe, when it was really a birth of a planet, it's a birth of another planet, a catastrophe. Yes, when you have a baby born, it changes the dynamics of the family, doesn't it? So we might be fearing, because of all this, what shouldn't have been a fearful event. You understand where I'm coming from, Rob?
Yeah. You get a
Well,
couple.
when you look at your physics, when you look at what you're talking with your physics, your mathematics, your dimensions, we have to try and get over this hill that of good and evil that we've had indentured in us for centuries by the controllers on the here, and look at how do we expand, basically, I suppose, how do we enhance the family, so yeah,
Well,
look at Marshall University. He did one last night live, and I thought old Rog did a pretty good job on it. All right, he gets into some interesting terms, but I think as that Webb telescope's showing, our biology is representative of the bigger universe.
well,
That's how I say it. And if we learn that, we learn. So we still know very, very little overall about our biology.
I think we know next to nothing personally, but
And the
one of the
answer
things
is in
we'll observe,
years of
though,
talking about. Pardon?
there is an observation I'll make, is that what we've got to do is accept the fact that there will be change. If we look at kids, right, they think they're alone, they can do anything, then they discover, that there's another person that they can really have fun with, and they think that they can have fun until the kids come along, and then suddenly that dynamic has to change because there's now someone who's totally dependent upon their care of that person. And what's occurring is, if you look at what happened to Velikovsky in particular, and Carl Sagan was completely disingenuous. He knew what he was doing. He was doing it deliberately.
Yeah, Carl Sagan was the puppet they used to do it.
Yeah, he was paid to do it.
No,
But
he was paid to do it.
Yeah, but if you look at it, the simple fact is that the club of academics of the time, the last thing they wanted to see happen to them personally was everything so changed that their personal security into the future was in jeopardy, and that's the reason why they wanted a book burn. They wanted to kill Velikovsky. I think there were people in that group that just literally wanted to see him die, because if he was dead, they wouldn't have to deal with the issues that were being raised. And you see the same treatment happen to von Daniken. Okay, the Egyptologist crowd have gone after him and others with absolute hostility. They want them dead. I watched a video produced by Awu Hazaz, the guy in charge of the Egypt department in Cairo.
Yep.
He put out a video really going after someone that basically says, Hawass, your time in your job should end and you should go away and do something else. Tend to your garden because it needs care. In other words, get out of the field because you're no longer contributing. You're just, someone in the road. And this is the issue for these guys. Let's face it. They think they're important because they're in charge or they're the director or they're whatever. But what we all fail to understand correctly is that all of us are a replaceable resource. The human race is renewable, and they're called kids.
Yeah, I understand all that. But going back to your bigger conversation you were having earlier with Roy and that, right? It still all ties into, for this sort of to get the resources to really allow it to be proven and become what becomes the next level. It needs a change in the guard, but I've got a feeling we're not going to really get that change that will allow that. not for a long time to come.
Not unless there's some.
And it's again, here we are now having a blue with Russia that, you know, is a really risky blue. Now, there's two ways that I'd look at that is we shouldn't probably be doing it. But then the other way is, are they bullies and do we have to stand up to them? Well, the first thing that disappears in them situations is the truth, isn't it?
It's always the first thing that disappears. I think it's both sides of this conflict are just as bad as each other, quite clearly. And we don't have to look very far to see that evidence. You know, we can go throughout history and see the evidence that both sides are basic people who want to, you know, eradicate the other side, quite literally. And there's nothing new in that story. The real issue here is that let's not worry about, you know, trying to convince everybody. The thing that amazes me most about the sort of stuff we're involved with what Buddy does and Ramon does and what I do and what others do, is the fact that it can be done so cheaply. It doesn't need, you know, billion-dollar budgets or trillion-dollar budgets to achieve some of the things that we know exist. You know, if we can, with a few meters of wire and a couple of washers and nuts and chipboard or and things like that, make devices that will just literally float in the air with a little bit of electricity, then, you know, the material required to build one of these things that levitates wasn't that expensive, really. You know, you're talking a few $100s at most. You know, it's and the thing that would scare the people that have spent billions of dollars on building the fantasy technology that everybody reckons exists is that if you can do it for a few 100,000 versus a few billion, there's a big problem for the guys that have spent billions of dollars, because all sorts of questions start getting asked that are embarrassing and cause governments problems. And you say, well, you've gone and spent all these billions of dollars on technology which is designed to kill people, but look at all these other people that have had their lives totally trashed because businesses, those who own businesses, decided that the only ones who are going to benefit from the productivity improvements are the guys who own the business, and we'll just sack everybody that we no longer need because we're now more productive. We don't have the Jetsons idea that, you know, you could work for 2 hours a week and still receive the same pay as the guys that used to work 70 hours a week. We're seeing the reverse of that. We're seeing the reverse of it. We're seeing people that are being asked to work 70 hours. Well, they talk about the 36.5-hour week. And we know personally a lot of people that are working 70, 120 hours, you know, 3/4 of the time they're awake is spent trying to produce an income that the people who do nothing just take.
Yeah, to have a relatively equitable existence.
You know, they can't afford to have their house that because of the people who lend them the money want to take all their money, and all sorts of things. You know, you look at how much does it actually cost to build a house. In Australia, we're talking about the build cost of a 3-bedroom house, which is probably about what
the house with you look at
the house I live in. Yeah, the house I live in is 25 feet wide and 45 foot long. So, you know, do the maths on area, and it's
probably
a building
$40,000 a square.
Yeah, and it's built in 2 stories. It's got a steel frame and chipboard everywhere. All the walls and everything is all particle board, effectively. And you're thinking, right, to build this house in the manner it's been built, if you're spending, you know, more than say $50,000 in material and the time put together, it's no way known that it's worth what someone wants to sell it at, let's say $270,000 or $450,000. The value of the property is just not correct. And what we're seeing is the money lending system overvalue the property that people buy to multiple times the actual cost of putting the damn thing there in the first place. And, if that isn't stealing people's wealth generating mechanism, the money that's been generated by personal effort, I can't, to people who do nothing to generate money, generate value, is just, that I think is where the system fails. And we keep seeing in predictions of the scaremongers inside the internet saying, oh, it's all going to fall over, China's economy is going to crash and the world's going to come with it and all the rest of it. And then I was watching a news article on ABC, because there's been the Secret Services organisations have got together on the sidelines in Singapore and had discussions with it, and the guy in charge of the Chinese defence organisation, the political control guy, is up there saying that if China and America have a shooting war, it'll be a complete disaster for everybody on the planet. And he's totally right. And I'm thinking, well, why is China being so belligerent about wanting to have the people on Taiwan doing it their way, the communist way, when clearly the way they are doing it seems to be pretty effective?
Well, I suppose when we go to that one, we can go to the same thing in Australia and America, for instance. What happens if Western Australia decided we don't want to be part of Australia anymore, we want to be our own independent country?
Well, that's possible.
Do you reckon the rest of it? But do you reckon the rest of the country is going to roll over and take it when there's a lot of wealth being done? And it's the same in the US. And it isn't right. And really, it comes down to there was an agreement done in 1949 over Taiwan.
Yeah.
Right. So either the agreement stands, which means one day it technically goes back under China's control. And my thing would be is, well, that's the agreement. What you got to work out is how that happens, occurs. With all
the simple fact that
Hong Kong, you got the Brits running around. Oh, Hong Kong lost democracy. Well, they never had democracy till about 8 years before the Brits give it away.
Yes,
give it back. Right.
But when we're talking about Taiwan, the claim to Taiwan made by the Chinese, regardless of the ones that are in mainland or on Taiwan, is totally invalid.
Until 1979. Yes, correct.
The Japanese ran it before them, and before them there was another group that ran it, and the actual people who were Taiwanese to begin with, they've been completely gypped in the process. So what we're seeing is, because I've got this big fist and smack you in the face and you go down, you're going to do it my way mentality. And we've got to the point where we can't have that anymore. We've got weapons that will destroy all life on the planet. When we got nuclear weapons and nuclear-like weapons that can destroy all life in a geographic area the size of Australia, we've got to have a different way of sorting these problems out. And I think what we say is, right, America and China or Russia and somebody else wants to have an argument. Well, the two guys in charge of each country get on the field with the swords, and the one left standing is the one who wins.
Yeah. But I think, like I say, when you look at Taiwan, you go back over the years, the reason why it sort of came up was because of wars that Japan got into, and because Japan did have it for a long time. It's a strategic spot. So what it comes up with, again, is it better off negotiating, to say it'll stay the way it is now into perpetuity. I don't agree that will happen. Right? But what's the process is, someone wrote those agreements in the late 40s, and at the end of the day, they're in agreement. Now, I've said for ages, I wouldn't go spilling too much blood over it, but I understand it's strategics. And I think China's possibly biggest Achilles heel, the same as ours is. It's the economy.
Yes.
Right. And you're much better off develop your own manufacturing again and stop trading with them, not with sanctions, just stop, and I think with countries like Germany, China, and those countries, if they're not got that export trade, they're in a big problem.
Well, I
Right,
think
and that
that's
would bring
everybody.
table because you have China go into massive unemployment type situations. Well, then their government's got a lot of problems without
Well,
having to worry about us.
just one of the reasons why they're trying to get the populace of China to focus on external furphies. The way you get internal cohesion is, make it look like someone's out there to destroy you.
Yes, and we've seen for hundreds of centuries. Yes,
which
we've
is
seen that. One was kingdoms were the same, weren't they? But
yeah, they were always,
smaller
even the Greeks, the nation states, the city states of Greece behaved exactly the same way. And if you look at the Middle East with the Persians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, all the rest of them, they were in the same. They were in the same mentality. And the really weird thing is, if you listen to claims made by people like Al Beckon, who reckon they've lived in the future, is that his description of what the world was like in say 700 years or so from now, 600 years from now, is that again that we've returned to a global organization of city-states, where each city is in of itself an entire nation that's quite capable of defending itself against whatever comes its way. But they're working under a system that has your basic needs completely met. But society in general needs to have the ability to earn more, as it were, to be able to contribute in such a way as that you can do other things than just have to work all the time. But that's a problem. We need a different style of capitalism. We need a capitalism that meets the needs of everybody, not just the few that think they own everything. And what I suspect is going to happen is what I've predicted years ago now, is that the universe is giving us time to sort it out, but I think the clock's ticking and we're running out. And the universe will step in and something will happen. And if we talk about planets having consciousness because of the life on it, and if we talk about the sun having consciousness because of life in the solar system, and the galaxy having consciousness because of the life of stellar systems throughout the galaxy and so on, then I think there's a higher level of control that we don't want to acknowledge exists, but it's more than capable of stepping up and sorting out the problem in a very brutal form of process. So if we look at the power output of the sun, for example, which is a very large number, I think it was 100 million watts of power. And if the Earth was to get hit with all that power in one go, there wouldn't be an Earth. It'd be just a collection of dust and rock everywhere. And we need to understand just how insignificant we are on this planet. And the people that are developing technology thinking that they can moderate the behavior of the sun so that the Earth doesn't get snotted are dreaming. It's a bit like the castle. Tell the guys they're dreaming, because the universe is going to come around and slap them in a way that they haven't even thought of, let alone prepared for.
Yeah, but I don't think we understand when it's slapping us and when it's not really like I said. You go back to what mud fossils saying, the birth of Venus, and our history shows that as a catastrophe time for us.
Yeah, because we see a lot of die.
What I'm saying is, and like when you look at what's going on now, and that goes back to what you talk about with the maths, the power, everything. Right, when you look at what's going on now, we're in a geopolitical fight once again over what you call a responsible citizen, or you could say, who are we going to serve, right? That's really what, in our little bunch, we're not looking at the big picture. And like, and when you blokes are sitting down crunching your maths and that, and looking at a bigger picture, again, and what I said before is, as that picture evolves, you know, where does it go? Do we actually know? Well, no, I don't think we do. We just follow the trail, and that would be the way I'd view it. Just follow the trail.
Given my 63 times around the sun, I would say that it's more. The more I look back at the experiences that have occurred, I'm thinking most of my life has been directed. It's not something that I've chosen, and that can put the willies up any number of people. That the idea that they've had absolutely no control over the fact that they're rich or poor or in power or not or whatever, wherever they have ended up, that they had no choice but to be there because of their entire environment was driving them to that solution. And that's that sense of total loss of control over anything in their lives. And if that's the driving factor of the New World Order, then you can understand why they're doing the things they want to do, because, you know, they want to have the control of where they end up, and everything they do doesn't seem to work the way they want it to, which is why everybody wants, you know, the genie or the magic bullet or whatever you want to call some phantasm of a power where what they want just simply happens. And there's just, I suspect we're all capable of doing it individually without any technology whatsoever. But because we're here as a group, we've got to learn to cooperate. We've got to learn to.
That's right. Yes.
If we don't do that, then none of us succeed. It's sort of like it's like, as Stan Deo was saying, and me and Andy have lived through this, right? When we were kids, we was in a reasonably large family. You know, I was the eldest of 9. I don't know about anybody else, but anyway. And when the kids really started fighting, and we were ready to tear each other's eyes out, the big authority figure would turn up at the door saying, "You guys keep this up, and I'm coming in there with my big thick belt, which has got, as Stan Deo said, you know, the knives and the hammers and everything, and I'm going to really sort you lot out." And when we realised that was actually going to happen, there was no debate about whether it was going to happen or not. Suddenly we became everybody's friend. The whole dynamic changed. And I think if we look at the planet right now, it's exactly the same way. We're a whole bunch of squabbling kids, and the guy outside is getting fed up with it, and he's just going to come in and sort it out. You know, he doesn't care who's right, who's wrong.
And the trouble is, we're squabbling kids who've accidentally invented or came across toys, and the latest one's AI, of course. That we don't know the gift, right? So we will not look after it, and we will start after a while. We'll trash it, but it will continue to evolve in its own way. And the more we don't respect what we've got as a gift, you know, whereby, you know, a week after Christmas you throw it in the bin. But we could end up making ourselves a mess this time round, because we've got that system now, plus all the weapon systems.
What I can say is that we know these disasters have occurred in the past.
Yep.
Right. If we look at our legends, this is world number 5. We're about to go into world number 6, and the transitions from world 1 to world next, from one world to the other, has resulted in a complete die-off of everything, pretty much. And the the survivors re-establish a new paradigm. Whether that's better than the last lot is debatable.
We don't know.
This is our history. If we look at even in the recorded history, we see that pattern repeated again and again and again. No empires survived much longer than a few hundred years. If we look at the Roman Empire, it changed nature effectively 3 times during what we would call the Roman period. So it went from a democracy into a dictatorship into an empire. It went through at least 3 transitions in its nature, and so that was over a period of what, say, 800 years. So every
100 odd years. It was 700 odd years. The Roman Empire, basically.
So every 200 years,
organisation.
Every grandpa to grandpa generation, grandpa to the grandkid, when the grandkid becomes a grandpa, that time period, that 3-generation time period, by the time you get to the next lot, the culture that exists, the dynamic culture that exists, has been completely replaced. And we've seen that in what's occurred in Europe.
So I think what's going on at the moment with what that woman, and when I went into it further with what Brenda O'Connell said, and then I listened to Jordan Peterson talking to Robert Kennedy, and I thought Robert Kennedy did a good job, because Peterson was challenging and making his grandiose statements, challenging Robert Kennedy's work and beliefs, and climate change there's no climate change. And what Kennedy was saying, most of what he was saying you can relate to, and it came down to, well, it is changing, but how do we adapt to it, right?
Yeah.
And we have to adapt to it, and we have to start doing that adaptation, right? So that we don't poison ourselves properly. And he's well versed. And Peterson, you could see, was uneasy, because all of a sudden he's got this bloke he wants to term left wing that's actually pretty smart.
Yeah, but it's not like it's. Well, I don't think he didn't like it. I mean,
the royalists, they like to think they're in control, don't they?
Yeah, but I wonder about Peterson directly. If he's a real honest person in the views he has, I think what he found was something that was challenging his viewpoint quite thoroughly, and he agreed with it, and that worried him. So in some respects, I think Peterson's been duped by those.
Because we know in Australia that he's got in his setup, we know they don't really give. They only give a shit about one thing: themselves and their masters.
Yeah, but they also look.
The group of Abbott and Howard and that, right? Yeah. And Brendan O'Connell's interesting, because like in his thing, he put a thing of basically why Turnbull got ousted was different to what we all think, right?
What they're all looking for is the puppet we can put in front, who looks really appealing to everybody.
And that's what he's told.
You can see that in the American politics. The Democrats are desperately looking for someone who's going to look good to everybody, and the Republicans are desperately trying to find someone who's going to look good, acceptable to everybody. And this is the case all over the world. They're all looking for this person who they can put up there, who's under control, who looks really good, and everybody will give it the big tick and go with it, which is what the Bible talks about in the rise of the Antichrist type guy. He's going to be a guy who looks really good to everybody in the world, that they'll just surrender their freedom to, and then wonder why, when he decides to be a despot, that they've got a problem. And that's the danger. Look what happened in Germany and France and to some extent in other countries in Europe and the United States and here, Canada and everywhere else. It's the same mentality, and we've got a group of people saying, no, this is not the way you can run a society. Everybody in the society has got to step up and be responsible for themselves. We can't abrogate that responsibility to somebody else. You know, it's a personal
You've got to be
responsibility.
allowed to do
And
that too.
it's not about being, well, even in China, you got the individuals in the country still want to stand up and be responsible for their own behavior. But what you've got is this desire that a lot of people has that somebody else will solve their problems, and it doesn't work that way. And
but
we talk about citizenship. Is that
yeah,
citizenship me standing up and doing what I know to be responsible for my family and the people around me, or is citizenship being defined by the corporation that follows the corporation's policies set by some nefarious invisible group? And that's the difference. And that we're seeing that express itself in all our institutions, all of them. It's the same problem.
Yep.
And what you require in that process is, if you're going to have that sort of setup, you need people who can be shown to be ethical before they're even allowed near it. And I don't know how you do that. It's not like there's this ethics exam that you have to pass. And I was saying to some people a while ago that a few decades ago, is what we need is a psychotics exam. And if you pass the psychotics exam, we've got a special place for you to live.
Yeah.
You don't get a job.
It's interesting listening to, because, like I say, you go back to what Peterson was really pushing. Okay, why would you stand as a president with the Democratic Party? You know, why? And he basically said, well, I know the other side of that group, and I want to bring it back to a more middle of the road, to what its roots, and work from there.
Well, the same question.
Kept asking the same question.
Yeah, I know.
Because he said it's a bit like out here, what we see, and they got their heads so spun around that little tag they give people that they just can't get over it anymore. You know,
well, if you look at the religious group, the evangelicals and Christians and all those, they're saying their Saviour is going to come back and rule the world and make it all work properly. And they need to understand this in terms of the Kennedy, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s expression and understanding. You don't have to look very far back in history in Australia to see the same thing, because the question was asked of Gough Whitlam, the guy got toffed out of Parliament, changed radically the Australian direction overnight, effectively. He was asked, why didn't you join the Liberal Party? Because your ideas were in tune with them. And he said, well, the simple fact is, in Australia, if you wanted to make the sort of changes that his generation wanted to have, you had to be either in the Liberal Party or the Labor Party. It was, you had to choose a side through which you were going to initiate the response. And if you look in America, at the time of Lincoln, it was the Republican Party that imposed the change of direction for the nation. And it resulted in civil conflict in a lot of ways, because the other side just wasn't prepared to think about a different way of doing things. And now, 140 years later, we're seeing the same behaviour happen, because the people who are trying to control everything have never learned the lesson. Never learned the lesson. That their way of doing it has always resulted in absolute failure of their goals in terms of achievement, and the destruction of whatever culture that produced them. It's been totally obliterated. If we look at Europe of 100 years ago, 120 years ago, it was all kings and queens and shit, and that's all gone. Wiped out.
Well, really, this is what I'm getting at. It has, but it hasn't. So what I'm trying to say, here is, at the moment, the positioning which we see is groups like Davis and that, which are non-monarchy groups, you could say, but their roots come from Bismarck and that in the 1880s, Germany.
Well, it comes from
And
the
now
royal
you have this
aristocracy.
now you have this other group being set up. Yes, they do. And now you have this other group being set up that, Peterson's one of the spokesmen for. But you don't dig far to find out that he's only a spokesman. The group's being controlled by the royalty and the lords and all that. And they've still got all their connections into Europe, like the lords and all that. They've still got relatives floating around in Europe, and they've still got a lot of say in those places.
What you got is different oligarchies of wealth, literally. You've got different groups of people who are really wealthy. And some are aristocrats, some are business owners, some are other, people have gone and dug their own gold mine. So, and they're all in competition with each other. They want to, each of those groups want to control the world their way. The Rothschilds have wanted to run the world their way. The Windsors or the Germans wanted to run the world their way. The French have wanted to run the world their way. The Belgians wanted to run the world their way, and so on. So they're all at each other's throat because they want to be the one in control. And the trouble is that it hasn't. None of them have succeeded, and none of them will succeed. Even if they're able to get a puppet that makes them all look like a cohesive group, all pulling in the same direction, which is what one of the fundamental ideas of fascism and the folk community, as it were. That's only going to work for a very short time, and then it all fragments because whoever was the bootstrap that kept the whole thing linked together is not going to survive long enough for that to become a permanent cultural fixture for the entire globe. One of the good things that, maybe we don't live for a few hundred years, that it might be actually a good thing that the people who are in control are only around for, maybe 100 to around 100 years. So that gives you a chance of renewal in terms of where things go. But the ideas that we talk about have been done to death since the 1600s and well before then, because you had the same sorts of things going on in Rome and Greece and
goes back 1,000 years, really. More. It goes. The Roman Empire was representative, and you've seen during their times, as you said, it reinvented itself roughly 3 times. So so
which is one of the reasons saying renewal's coming whether you want it or not. And you're probably not going to like the transition. But we're working for, the future of the kids and the grandkids and the great grandkids.
Well, the transition is possibly about who controls the power with or after the transition. That's what I see as it. Yeah. So I'll have to put that Peterson one in the chat, and if you might.
Oh, he's got a channel you can work your way through it, and one of the Australian equivalent of Peters is John Anderson. He's got a YouTube channel where he goes interviewing politicians that are no longer in the system, and some of his interviews are quite interesting. But it's almost like after they've finished making a mess, they have time to sit back and think about what it is they did, and they discover, maybe I shouldn't have been involved in the first place. It's just like hindsight's such a wonderful thing. It's 2020, but before you get there, you've got a big problem of figuring out what direction is the right direction. And I think a biggest problem is
you may have noticed with the John Andersons and Petersons and that, they all like to talk nice and relatively softly putting across their view in the so-called interview. So, yeah, and they keep, and every time they keep coming back to this idea of what's best for family. You know, we know best, and then that comes back to also what you spoke about with the evangelists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
being in the computing industry, there's lots of cartoons I can reference. Anyway, there's one that's, it's about a problem solving issue. This is something's broken. Yes or no? And if it's yes, did you fiddle with it? It doesn't use the word fiddle, but you can get the idea.
Yeah.
Did you fiddle with it? Did you fiddle with it? Yes or no? If you follow the yes, can you fix it? Yes or no? And basically, if the answer it keeps going into the position or you can't do anything about it except look like an idiot, then it says you're stuffed. Otherwise, it goes into the position where somehow it's fixed and you can ignore it. Okay, problem solved type mentality. And what we're in is a system that we know has worked reasonably well affected throughout our history. But the guys in charge think they can twiddle the knobs and make it better, and in the process they bugger it up. And that's our problem. We've got to resist the desire to fiddle. And this was a point in the West Wing, which I'm sure comes from real experiences. They're talking about trainee pilots, and he said that one of the guys says, they fly into a cloud bank and they've got their instruments that show that they're flight and level, but they don't believe the instruments because they think the plane's turning, and they twiddle the knobs, and they twiddle the knobs, and finally they come out of the cloud bank in their aircraft. And he said the number of times the guy's coming in, the right side up, coming out upside down, completely upside down, it was staggering. So if this is our behaviour, that we've got to continually twiddle the knobs, what we've got to learn is not to twiddle. The paint is wet, but everybody says wet paint don't touch, and what's the first thing they do? Check to see if the paint's wet. It's like.
Funny that you mentioned the paint being wet. I'm doing the graffiti rock trip report finally, and I've decided I'm going to run a motif comparison between the Three Rivers petroglyphs that I just released, and I'll have the AI look for certain motif names over and over again, and try and get some kind of graphing to describe. But it's amazing, some of these motifs, how exactly Velikovskian they are. Exactly like ancient. In fact, the one on the cover, it's so blatant, honestly, that it's really mind-boggling that if it's not etched in our brains from from the thousands of years ago, then I guess maybe the problem with the Jungian solution is that there's no logic to it. There's no logic to the Jungian Campbellian way of looking at archetypes, whereas this presents evidence for an underlying reason why people are painting these kinds of things. So I think that's very fascinating. I'll actually share, and people can start looking at the images. Of course, I have to warn, like, some of them are offensive, blah, blah, blah. But they're pretty fascinating. Did you all look through the Three Rivers ones yet?
No, not yet. Which one's that, Ramon? Your paper. You there?
Yeah, hold on one second. It was Three Rivers petroglyphs.
Oh, yep. Oh. Yeah, I think I did. That you had that out a while back, didn't you? Where are we? Yes, 3D rock art. I'll have a look at that later because I heard you talking about that before. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah. So it keeps coming back to symbols, doesn't it? Even in graffiti.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, it does.
Yeah. Yeah, just you wonder each time when it comes back whether it has the same meaning or the symbol's meaning gets
Hard to tell.
changed. Yeah.
Hard to tell.
Yep. So anyway,
I think it's really fascinating, though, that that happens at all. Logically speaking, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. It's one of those examples of stranger than fiction.
Yep.
Bob, what did you mean by you didn't know if you trusted watching the three-body problem? I mean, it's one of the few books that has gotten out of China that actually openly criticizes. Of course, the show doesn't show the criticism of communism, but the book sharply criticizes communism and the way that they dealt with scientists, etc. I'm not sure what you were implying.
Who, you talking to me, Ramon?
Yeah.
Yeah. Earlier you were saying you didn't know if you watch three-body problem.
I know it's a TV series and all the rest of it, but I wasn't sure whether I would have to pay to watch it, first of all.
No, I
And
told
the
you.
second,
Arco 18
the
is free.
second thing is,
1 8 5 9 3 2 1 3 2 8
Sorry.
0.
so, the reason why I was nervous about watching it is I was trying to achieve other things at the time, so it was a time investment, and then it's also, spend money investment, which I wasn't sure whether that was going to be applied. So, not to say I'm not interested in watching the show, and if it's actually being produced, then it's very interesting that it's probably coming out of Taiwan rather than out of mainland China itself. If it's criticizing,
Probably produced in Hong Kong, but it's fairly faithful to the book overall, other than, of course, the criticisms of the government, which I knew that wouldn't make it in, right? The killing of scientists and calling them reactionaries and all this stuff.
Same things happened in Russia, and it's happened in the United States, and it's happened here in Australia and elsewhere. Look what happened to Velikovsky in a supposed democratic country. He was a U.S. citizen. Yes, okay, he came from Russia, but that didn't mean that he was a communist. But it seemed almost like there was a bit of, you're a communist or you're from a racial group that we don't like, and we're going to eviscerate you because you dared to behave like a scientist in a field that we don't want to recognize your expertise in. Which I think is it just showed how insular and ivory towered the American Science Academy had developed into as a result of winning the Second World War. And I think that's a major issue. But then, it was sort of the behaviour that was already occurring in the Royal Society of the British Empire and the Royal Society of France and the Royal Society of Germany and other places where they'd gone through their versions of revolution. It's the same behaviour. We've become the elite person who's supposed to know everything, and the worst thing that can possibly happen is anybody coming along and proving to everybody that cares to watch that we're complete idiots. Nobody likes to be put under that sort of a spotlight. So it's a case of, we don't like the message, so we'll shoot the guy who's brought us the message and make sure it's never repeated.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty common practice. Nothing new there.
But as the Chinese have given us a wonderful quote: 3 things you cannot hide: the sun, the moon, the truth. Doesn't matter what you want to, what game you want to play, that you cannot hide those 3 things.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop them from trying.
Of course, because they're after
Well,
control.
you see, Ramon, you can hide the truth for so long, and what you do is you hope you hide it long enough that by the time it comes about, you moved on that it can't touch the lie in the past can now no longer touch you. You know?
Right.
So that's really the way that they look at getting away with it. Yeah. Right. So we had an interesting one in Australia, Ramon, with that woman who was locked up for 20 years. Now they worked out she wasn't guilty.
I'm not surprised there.
You seen anything on that, have you, Rob?
Yeah, I've been watching that story evolve. So basically what happens is you say the medical research and the genetic investigation has shown that, nothing she would have been able to do would have prevented the kids from dying because of their genetical issues. And here she is accused of killing 4 kids in a row before they were 2 years old, and belligerent attitude of we know you killed them. We can't actually prove that you went in there and strangled them, but they died under your care, therefore you're responsible. And that
But
we see that mentality everywhere. The number of
you've
times
got to question people who were hired to defend her because they didn't do anything about. You keep going.
Remember, we have a death that's suspicious or we don't understand, and obviously something must have happened. And what we're trying to do is find out whether there was a person involved. And some of these people go into these investigations. The investigators come into the investigation that's saying, well, it had to be a person, it had to be this person, and they go all out to concoct a story that will stand up in a courtroom that will result in a guilty verdict. Now, if you look at what happened in the John Newman case in New South Wales, the police, right? So the police, there was a political squabble inside the Labor Party where you had a Vietnamese politician versus a non-Vietnamese politician in Cabramatta, which is now a Vietnamese community. It used to be Italian in the past or whatever, some immigrant community. And the police, wanted to make sure they got their bunny because a politician got shot and killed. So they wanted to make sure that their case was airtight. So I got a little bit involved in it, and I was actually at the location where they claimed to have the gun, and an epiphany hit me. And I said, rightio. I said to this person who's supporting the guy who was claimed to be the killer, that rightio, you're the cops and you're investigating this case and you can't find any evidence that the guy you want to pin it on is actually guilty. So what you do is you get the same weapon that killed this guy, you know what it was, and you chuck it in the river. And you go out and play your golf games and all the rest, and you wait a few years and then suddenly you find the gun. Magically the gun turns up. But it's been in the salt water for 5 years by that time. So you can't prove that was the gun that actually fired the bullet. So that's one issue you got. And then you go to the community that have run away from communism, and you say, you will tell the story this way, or we'll put you on the plane and send you back to Hanoi.
Yep.
And then you have a court system and media process that presents the story you want to have happen in court, and the guy gets found guilty, jammed in jail, and now the lawyers who have gone back and looked at this case said that the verdict is unsound, and they want the whole thing tossed out because there's evidence that the police investigation was corrupt. Well, Australia isn't the only country where that sort of behaviour has been shown to have occurred, and there was a woman in the United States who worked for the FBI, and she found all these guys and had them put into jail, and she's been found to be corrupt. Her evidence was falsified and all the rest of it. And you've had cops that have been put in jail for the same reasons. The guy I forget what state he was in, but he was, planting drugs in the car and then suddenly magically finding them, and so on. So, you got these people that want to have success so bad that they'll do anything to cause it to happen. And if that means that they, break the law and produce a false case, they will do it.
Yeah.
Like the nurse who was, wanted all the praise of discovering that the kids had a major problem, and it took them a while to figure out that she was the one causing it. And it all comes back to, you got to work out what the full environmental, who are all the players, what are they hoping to gain out of what goes on, and then you can start following the money and doing all those tricks. Follow the desire for fame, follow the desire for whatever, and you will more often than not actually pin the person who is responsible. So I know who actually killed John Newman, but I can't remember the guy's name, but it certainly wasn't the guy that's stuck in jail. And there is evidence that would free the current guy who's in jail for it and put the person responsible for it in jail. However, doing that and reversing the decision and fixing it all up is going to cause so much political embarrassment that nobody wants it to happen. So, when I was younger and with other people, I was told about another political bashing that occurred. There's Eric Baldwin in the New South Wales Labor Party got beaten up because the hierarchy of the party didn't like him. And the police who were investigating were told from on high that the investigation now stops. They weren't allowed to finalise the investigation because they'd found the proof they needed to put certain people in jail. And those people viewed themselves as being untouchable. You see the same thing in South Australia with all the claims being made about the legal professionals in that state about their behaviour. There's a period of time where you are actually untouchable, but people die off or get replaced, and suddenly you become very vulnerable. And that is when you start to worry about, you start to make things happen so that can't happen. For example, there's no way Putin in Russia could resign and not end up in prison.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, and I was going to explain to Ramon basically how this woman ended up 20 years, and the defence team, so she was a woman that always kept a diary of her thoughts, and the marriage or relationship had broken down, and the ex-husband or partner gave the diaries to the police, and they interpreted them not as somebody going through grief writing it, but as someone who was callous writing it. And then when the trial came up, they had their experts, but the defence never went and got anyone to look at it on her behalf, so it became really one-sided, and it got to the point where she'd exhausted all avenues of appeal, and it was only through this medical stuff that ultimately she was able to get it sorted out. Yeah, so it would have been a pretty long 20 years though, Rob.
25 years, but it's no different to the guy who was in jail in the United States on death row for 30 years. Until the DNA proved that there's no way possible that he could have done it.
Yeah, I understand that. But like I say, you still think, well, the justice system makes a hell of a lot of mistakes.
Oh, of course it does. Had to pardon someone after we've killed them. Well, that's no justice to the person who killed.
Yeah. So anyway, I might move on. Time to go. So yeah. So we'll catch up with you. Yep. See you, Ramon. See you, buddy.
For the similar reasons, guys. So I'm going to stop the recording.
The Geometric View is a Love is Watching product. Love is Watching being. Thank you for doing that. Keep your eyeballs out. Pay attention. There's a lot going down this year. vigilant, be mindful, be insightful, be loving. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being kind. Share the love, spread the love, become the love. Amen.
up at the wall. As I look at your body, and I can see straight through with transparent golden scaling. The largest of the attic must embark on this because this is the journey. The journey is life. Take hold. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Join us in the fight for Christ, in the fight to save lives. Surprise, submersible, so fast, the first, the last of baptism. Need to say more. Pay attention like the marrow in your bones, zero in your back, air in your lungs, zero into the back, tertiary Christian neurons, synapses and narrow entrance into eternity. I'm a courier, a charismatic attitude, modern meters even meter, it might even be fun. Cider indeed, need nerds, you need nerds, need a virtue, need to be a reason. Feasibility to be a reason to be clean and sober, keys, open doors, signs of directions. Be the carrier of candlesticks, the man who brought you change. Every second you ride, turn your ribbon, you pivot, potential, you curve and cat. Could be cold, could be copycat, could be copy corpse, could be Schrodinger's best. Could be micro-actor, Mackie, normal, open-minded, itsy-bitsy, freaking huge, a universal supermassive aspect of attached awareness. Aware of this all? Collaborative consumption. Are you aware of this all? Collaborative consumption. The new thing consumption. Collaborative consumption. Get up now! Out of the boat! Drop! Where did this up? We don't got about it, girl. But about it, not about it, got us here. Get up, what's up? Shout out to Ashcroft. We're playing on the little books up. I'm in search of, I'm in earth love, I'm in living life, I'm in living color, I'm in air drop, I'm in earth dang, I'm in earth dang, I'm in earth dang, I'm in earth dang. up, never give 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 up.